when government forces fired live rounds and tear gas. The wounded were then taken to the city's main Salmania hospital, where protesters have gathered there to offer blood and support. This report from our correspondent in Manama. For security reasons, we are not naming him.
The emergency room of Bahrain's largest hospital straining to cope as the first patients are treated. Doctors battle to save the most seriously ill. This man has a bullet lodged in his brain.
There was a rush of people, injured, casualties. There are hundreds of patients who were brought in the hospital. There are still people who are lying in the roundabout. There are still people who are thrown in the street. We don't know how many patients are there so far. And they've stopped the ambulances from going there again, once again.
For one doctor, the stress was too much. Some patients have clearly been traumatized by what's happened to them. Relatives are angry. This woman says she hopes God will bring down the Khalifa family. The hospital beds are full. These were unarmed protesters who'd been marching peacefully when the military started firing live rounds and tear gas at them.
They fired at us from all sides, using guns, rubber bullets and live ammunition. It came from everywhere, from the air, from the riot police and the Air Force. They used tear gas, really all kinds of weapons.
Outside the Salmania hospital, crowds began to grow. This had become a place of protest. Down, down, Hamid, a reference to this country's ruler, King Hamid. Hours after the troops opened fire, the injured were still being brought here, to the shock of the crowd. Some of the protesters are already vowing to march again in the coming days. They say the heavy-handed tactics of the authorities will not stop them. AlJazeera, Bahrain.
Well, the whistle-blowing website WikiLeaks says that it plans to release more U.S. diplomatic cables on Bahrain, and that's in the coming hours. London's Telegraph newspaper is reporting that one details a warning from Bahrain's king to the U.S. military that opposition groups in the island state were receiving training from Hezbollah in Lebanon with help from Syria. King Hamad made that claim in a July 2008 meeting with the U.S. General David Petraeus. But the cable says that the king admitted he had no proof. Let's speak to Joseph Keshishian. He's an author on Middle East affairs and a columnist with the newspaper Gulf News, and joins us now live from Los Angeles. Welcome to Al Jazeera, Mr. Keshishian. Are you surprised at all by this WikiLeaks on what the King of Bahrain has said?
Not really. These accusations have been made before. And we know that Hezbollah operatives may have been involved, not just in Bahrain, training opposition figures, but also in Egypt. Several individuals were arrested a couple of years ago, and they were supposed to be put on trial. We understand that some of them have escaped already and are already back in Lebanon using passports issued by Syria. So therefore, when the King of Bahrain issues a statement like that, or allegedly reveals that kind of information to a visiting dignitary, obviously this is not surprising at all. These kinds of exchanges probably occur much more frequently than we assume.
I'm just reading here that the cables also disclose Bahrain's discontent. You can say that an Iranian official publicly spoke of the country as Iran's 14th province, and that was back in 2009. I want to ask you about how you think Iran is viewing the situation in Bahrain right now, and how susceptible are Bahrainis to any Iranian influence, if at all?
With a great deal of suspicion and care. Obviously, the relationship between Iran and Bahrain go back several decades. For many, many years, Iranian officials have always, from the Shah's times all the way to recently, they've always claimed that, in fact, Bahrain was their 14th province. And this issue was settled back in 1970 when the United Nations conducted a referendum, at which point the majority of the people of Bahrain decided that they wanted to be independent. More recently, as you said, in 2009, there have been a few clerics in the Iranian hierarchy that have reiterated these claims, and they've never really accepted the independence of Bahrain, if you want, as an independent country. I'm not surprised of these situations. This is a long-term concern that everyone has. But what's interesting now is that the King of Bahrain is falling into a very major trap, giving Iran an opportunity to get involved, presumably to come to the assistance of its Shia brethren that are caught in the middle of this melee in Bahrain. So this is a very sensitive time for both Iran and Bahrain. They both have to be very careful how they position themselves vis-a-vis the other. And of course, the Iranians are very strong. They're very powerful compared to Bahrain, a very small country. But Bahrain has a great many friends. So we'll have just to wait and see what happens.
Well, on that note, Mr. Kashishian, what about neighboring countries to Bahrain, those perhaps that share a direct border? Are they concerned that the situation could spill over?
There is always the fear of spillover effect, whether it's in Kuwait, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's elsewhere in the Gulf. However, I think that unless this tension is quickly calmed down and cooler heads kind of meet around the table and quiet the situation down, this could become very dangerous. And the leaks that we are seeing, whether it's from WikiLeaks or other newspaper accounts and so on, all indicate that there is an appetite for enhancing this kind of crisis. Whose interest does that serve? I'm wondering whether or not the Bahrainis are falling into a trap that they should not fall into.
And just finally, Mr. Kashishian, back to this WikiLeaks that the king said opposition groups in Bahrain were receiving training from Hezbollah in Lebanon with help from Syria. If this were in fact true, could this be a reason why we're seeing the level of violence that we've seen from the Bahraini military towards peaceful protesters?
Well, there are 2 points here. One, Arab leaders have been reticent to criticize each other. In this instance, if the WikiLeaks allegations are true, in fact, you have a monarch who is criticizing a fellow head of state. This is serious business. In this case, King Hamad criticizing President Bashar Assad of Syria. On the other hand, there is also the demonstrations in the streets of Manama. There have been a number of people who have been killed. Obviously, there is fear that this could enhance the kind of power of the military in Bahrain, how they're going to handle with it. So this is a very dangerous situation right now. It seems to me that no one really wants this to escalate more than it already has. And we'll just have to wait and see whether the king will be a wise monarch.
Okay, Joseph Kashishian, thanks very much for talking to us there live from LA. In other news, in Yemen, at least 6 people have been killed during the latest anti-government protests. Well, the so-called Friday of Rage attracted thousands of people to the capital, Sana'a. Demonstrations have now gone on for 8 straight days, with calls for the president to resign growing louder. In Jordan, at least 8 people have been injured in clashes between pro and anti-government